Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is the author of the book, The Bipolar Bear Family. And of course, he's having a neuroscience or behavioral science as a advocacy and a Christian formation, no other than Dr. Angela Deulen.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Book 101, Miss Angela, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Oh, yes, of course. Well, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor. But probably my biggest joy is teaching psychology at California Baptist University here in Southern California, where I have the privilege of teaching master's level students how to become clinicians. But I also have the privilege of teaching various forms of behavioral neuroscience courses, and that is just my joy.
Joy indeed, Miss Angela Deulen. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And let's talk about the bipolar bear. What inspired you using animal characters to explain bipolar disorders complexities to children?
Well, yes, of course. So this book is almost 20 years old. I wrote the book really just out of a desire to try to explain something that's very complex. Bipolar disorder is a very serious mental illness. It is highly genetic. It is more genetic than schizophrenia, more genetic than cancer. And yet there is a lot of, there was then, as there still is, a lot of shame and stigma around specifically this disorder, but mental health in general. And so I wanted a way to explain to children. I grew up with a bipolar parent, and I was raised quite a bit by my grandparents. I spent a lot of time in my early childhood at their home. My grandfather had a very severe form of bipolar disorder. He was also a recovering alcoholic. And I watched him just struggle, but also have tremendous victories. I actually think my grandfather is probably the reason I became a clinician. And then but I also got to watch kind of this really tricky intersection of what it is to live with a severe mental illness and be a person of faith at a time, and this would have been in the 70s when I was growing up, that if you had a mental illness, you were kind of a pariah in faith circles. So I wanted a way to explain to children like myself, and to my own children as they were growing up, what it means to be part of a family that has a significant mental illness, such as bipolar disorder. And mental illness, I've always said, is not something that happens to an individual, it happens to a family. And when we can support each other as a family, when we come around as a family, uh, outcomes are just better. People do better. So I wrote this book originally. You're trying to think, how do you communicate these difficult kinds of concepts to young children? And the idea to make it a polar bear family, a bipolar bear family, was born. And so this book originally was really with the intention of a way that a clinician could sit with a child who had a parent that had been diagnosed with either bipolar type 1 or bipolar type 2 and help talk them through what that means, and to make sense of some of the experiences that you have. I remember growing up, and the parent that I had been diagnosed this way would go sometimes for days with only a couple hours of sleep, and would do all kinds of weird things in the middle of the night that were difficult to make sense of. There's also a history of suicide attempts in my family, and I was working with children that were also trying to understand what that meant when their parent had a suicide attempt. And because, if not addressed so early, uh, sometimes children will also become suicidal. And so trying to help children find a language and to process things that they didn't even know how to ask, that were percolating in them. And I believe for children, their language is first play, and after play it's storytelling. And so it was really a way to help children, including my own, be able to process what it is to be part of a bipolar bear family.
Dr. Angela, beautifully articulated. Totally empowering answer. What was missing in the existing resources that motivate you to create this book?
Yeah, Daniel, as a clinician, I was working mostly with children then, and I had great resources if their parents were divorcing, and great resources, books and games and toys if somebody had died, and great resources if they had a parent who had cancer, or those kinds of things. But there was not a resource to help children really understand, what does it mean when your parent is up at all hours of the night cleaning house? Or what does it mean when they get angry over something that you kind of can't understand? And the questions that children have about these kind of illnesses, like, is it contagious? Am I going to catch it? Well, if it's genetic, am I going to get it? Is it my fault when, mommy or daddy gets angry or becomes manic or becomes depressed or can't get out of bed? What does that mean? And so there wasn't a resource, so I created one.
How did you translate clinical terms like mania or mixed exposure into a concept a child can grasp?
Yes, that was very, very tricky. There were two tricky things to writing this book, Daniel. One is that you're trying to capture the experiences that children with a parent that have a severe mental illness tend to experience, like, for example, disruptions in anger and mood regulation, without doing it in a way that actually is traumatizing for them, right? So I had to be kind of thoughtful and careful and think through that aspect of it. But then the other part to your question, Daniel, was really, how do you explain these clinical concepts that sometimes are a little difficult to even explain to my master's level students, the difference between mania and depression? And so I had to strip it of until the very end of the book, where you get to the Q&A. I had to strip it a lot of that language. The other thing is, the book features a really kind doctor named Penny the Penguin, and Penny is able to answer the young polar bear's questions about what does it mean when his mother gets diagnosed. And so I used the character of the penguin to talk through his questions, and I also put a Q&A section at the end then, which when it's facilitated by a thoughtful parent or a clinician, it was really designed more for clinicians, then it, I think, helps children really understand these complex ideas, but in terms that are digestible for them, that they understand.
How does the book help kids understand that bipolar does not define their parent?
Such a good question. And I think that's one thing that if I could go back 20 years, I might even emphasize a little more. It's something that I spend a lot of time teaching my students. I ask them, please don't refer to that person as schizophrenic or as bipolar. When you do that, you're making that illness define them. We don't tell somebody they're cancer, we say they have cancer, or they're not Parkinson's, they have Parkinson's. And that is just it's an illness that they face, that they have to manage, that is in many instances going to deepen their faith or strengthen their character development, but it's not who they are, any more than me being a brunette is who I am. It's just something I have.
Very well said, Dr. Angela. Beautifully, beautifully articulated. What's your approach to addressing a child's fear of abandonment during a parent's depressive episode?
Daniel, that's tricky too. That is that really depends, because sometimes the abandonment is real, and sometimes it just feels like abandonment because the child is trying to make a bid for connection, but mom or dad is too depressed to maintain a conversation. So, abandonment's this really big, complex thing that's kind of hard to rate or even define, because it could be, on one end, the child who just wants a connection, and it could be, the parent who has decided to leave the home, doesn't want to take medication, is going to maybe engage in another problem that exacerbates, like, for example, substance abuse. And that's a whole other kind of abandonment, right? And then there's all the things that happen in between. So that's something that really has to be taken on a case by case basis. And the tricky thing with children, because they're so internal, because they tend to internalize so much. My adult son and I were, making jokes the other day about how, when we were kids, how we thought the world revolved around us. And one of the things I did, I don't know how old you are, Daniel, but when I was a kid in the 70s, Baskin Robbins ice cream had a big 31 on the sign, because they had
Yes.
31 flavors. And I decided it was named after me because I was born on the 31st, right? So we have this
Mm.
huge, what we call an internal locus of control. And so when parents divorce, kids automatically think it's because of me. And that's just normal reaction. So when a parent is having a manic episode, and they engage, or a depressive episode, and they engage in a behavior, they punch a wall, or they engage in a self harm, or those kinds of things. They think it's their fault. I had a family member who had a very serious suicide attempt when I was 7 years old. And I really believed it was because I was such a bad kid. And I carried that with me for a long time. So the tricky thing with that, Daniel, is helping children then separate out their parents' behavior from who they are, and to really start to learn and internalize that they are not responsible for their parents' behavior, that they cannot control their parents' behavior any more than they can control the weather, right? You can't make your mommy or daddy mad. You can't make them sad. You can't make them happy. You can do your best to be a good kid, but at the end of the day, your parents' reactions and their behaviors, and even their feelings are statements about them. They're not statements about you as, 7-year-old Johnny or Sally or what have you. So that takes time in therapy, and it takes practice, and it takes parents or caregivers at home that will help reinforce it. So one of the challenges sometimes is you might have a family member that will inadvertently reinforce it, like, oh, your mom wouldn't have been so stressed out and drank if you had been a better child. Well, that's just not how it works. It's just not how it works. As children, you just don't have that much power.
Dr. Angela, what would be your short-term and long-term goals as an author and as well as a clinician?
Well, I think I'm surprised a little bit by the longevity that the Bipolar Bear family has had and has enjoyed. I'm grateful for it. As you know, Daniel, we were talking before the movie that it was actually even used in the 2021 film Come On, Come On, that stars Joaquin Phoenix, and it was just really impactful. I get, emails from people that say how it impacted them to see it on the big screen. I'm working on really thinking through and developing my thoughts on the intersection of neuroscience and Christian formation and what that looks like in our families and in communities. So right now, I'm wrapping up a manuscript that I've been working on for about 3 years on what we would call the neurotheology of romantic love. And it's really that intersection of behavioral neuroscience and theology and how that translates into marriages, and in a postmodern world where divorce rates are high and people are just not even getting married anymore, and then there's all the fallout from the breakdown in the family. That's really kind of my immediate goal, is to really to finish that project. But I've started another project, and that is really the intersection of behavioral neuroscience in community. We live in such a broken time, Daniel, you know that. We have systemic issues like substance abuse, and in my community mental health class, we talk about the number of people that are incarcerated that have a diagnosed mental illness. It's about a third. And depending on where in the country you're looking, anywhere from a fourth to half of the incarcerated population, sometimes more, are there for a substance abuse related disorder. We have, we talked about the breakdown in the family. We have schisms and divides in this country that are now even dividing families. We don't talk enough about how, poverty affects the development of the brain, and then how that adult brain then later has this kind of reflexive nature back onto the society and the community that we live in. One of my favorite books is The God-Shaped Brain by Timothy Jennings, and one of the points he makes in there, he's a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, and one of the points he makes in there is, if you're thinking about law and justice in kind of an angry, vengeful way, you're going to be an angry, vengeful person. If you're thinking about law and justice in ways that are geared towards love and mercy and forgiveness, you're going to be a loving, forgiving person. Well, that shapes our community, Daniel. That has this whole impact of how our society then is formed. And because we become who we think, how we think. So to answer your question, Daniel, my immediate goal as an author is to finish this book, to really help families and marriages and people who are just looking for love and looking to build or repair love that lasts a lifetime, using what I know about neuroscience and theology to help them do that. My little bit longer term goal is to kind of create a framework that helps us as a community and as a society do better by one another and to care for one another better.
Good luck to your goals, Dr. Angela, and looking forward for more and more success. And what would be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be an author as well as a clinician?
Oh, that's a good question. You know what? If you want to be an author, you've got to write every day, even if it's terrible. Anne Lamott has a book on writing, and she says, I can't quote it verbatim because she uses a foul word, but she basically says, just write a crappy first draft because you just got to get it on paper and then you can fix it later, but you just got to do it. Don't put it off. Just write a little bit every day. If you want to be a clinician, um, it's hard because you have to listen to these difficult stories, 8 hours a day, and then be able to be present and have the heart to do that, and then kind of be able to almost wall it off a little bit so you can go home and be with your family. You can't take all of your clients' heartbreak and trauma home to your family. So you have to be able to have a really good intra-psychic boundary. So for somebody who's thinking about being a clinician, I would say just just work on developing that first, that ability to be 100% present with somebody while they're in front of you and in your office, and then to be able to compartmentalize it, that stays in the therapy room, so you can go home and be 100% present with your loved ones. That would be my advice.
Thank you for your advice, Miss Angela, and truly, truly empowering. And
Thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
you're most welcome. And let's talk about the broader mission beyond bipolar. Could this model work for other mental health conditions?
Oh, I absolutely, I think so. I mean, it's what we refer to as psychoeducation. It's just sometimes difficult for people to figure out how to pair. So psychoeducation is teaching a clinician, is teaching a client about a diagnosis, about the things that cause it, about the best ways to recover. And I come from a recovery oriented model. That means that we're not trying to cure you, because for most of the things that we struggle with in life, that's not realistic. It's about recovery. It's about, you know, learning how to live at your best, most fulfilled baseline and how to maintain that best baseline. And so psychoeducation is, how is providing for that client or consumer a educational context to really understand a diagnosis, whether it's a particular form of cancer, or it's asthma, or it's schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, even an adjustment disorder based from a difficult move. So it's about educating them and then giving them the tools in that education to be as successful in the recovery as possible. The trick here is taking that psychoeducation and then paring it down for a 7-year-old. But it's certainly doable. And I think it just honors kids to do that, because otherwise what you're doing is you're treating the kid like, you're not capable of understanding this. It's grown up stuff. Don't worry about it. But then they don't have a place to process or to learn or to even understand what they're experiencing. And in that way, it's almost a form of gaslighting, because then they have to pretend like this thing that feels abnormal is normal. And so by providing that the child-oriented psychoeducation, you're giving them a framework then to understand and to heal and to grow and to process.
Miss Angela, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well, geography 101 in its fourth season, and my baby podcast, law 101 and Mental Health 101 Love Letters in fourth season, as well as my movie 101 review and music 101, Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. Miss Angela, what is the most important idea you hope families take from this book?
It's okay to be brave, to have the conversations that need to be had. Just be honest with one another. I do believe that love covers a multitude of sins. And if you can sit down and lovingly and kindly have these hard conversations that I wish could have been held in my family growing up, conversations that I saw my grandfather actually model. If you can do that, I think your family will most likely be okay. It's when we pretend that it's not there, when we lack the courage to have the conversations, when we treat kids like these are grown-up problems and we'll discuss it when you're 30, that things start to unravel. So just be brave. Have those loving, kind, honest conversations.
Yes, people, be brave and show your God to the world, like
Yes.
Miss or Dr. Angela Deulen. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world through your book and advocacy. So, can you please invite our listeners to support the Bipolar Bear family as well as your advocacy or your business itself?
Oh, absolutely. I am fairly easy to find. The book is easy to find if you go onto Amazon and just in Amazon's little signal search thing, type in the Bipolar Bear Family and it'll come up. And my website is www.angelaDeulen, that's Delta Edward Umbrella Lima Edward Nancy.com.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Angela Dolan or Dr. Angela Dolan because if you support her, more and more and more empowering books like this to come, more and more empowering advocacy to come. So, Miss Angela, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. It was a pleasure.
More to come, people. See you soon.